Actually move on to a question that relates to what you just said, Dr. Singh. And maybe if Ms. Brill can start off with this. It's a very pressing question in Korea and a very difficult one. It's about how should society balance the need to access data to provide better services and products from the perspective of probably business and firms primarily, versus protecting privacy of individuals. And so we've talked about sort of the European approach of a human rights-based approach where you have broad regulation like the GDPR. We've also talked about where we've seen the US where it's a more targeted approach for specific sectors and maybe letting it see and how, and maybe relying on more private regulation. So for Korea, now we do have to make our own choices. There's a lot of discussion going on. Could you share your experience in the US and maybe your thoughts on this first?
Sure, and I am aware that this is a very robust debate right now with respect to the Personal Information Privacy Act, or Protection Act here in Korea, and the role that it may or may not be playing in terms of advancing economic, advancing the economy and the use of data. So I have a lot of experience around the globe with different systems. And I know we're coming to the end, so I'm going to try to make this brief. The United States gets about a B+. Europe gets about a B+. Korea has an opportunity to get, an A- or an A. And the way that will happen, I believe, is by taking the good aspects of what you see in the United States and the good aspects of what you see in GDPR and mushing them together. There is a wrinkle here, though, that I think Korea is thinking deeply about as well, and that is the adequacy determination that I think is something that I know many policymakers are deeply thoughtful about and are hopeful to obtain. And I think what underlies trying to develop a new system that is more robust and allows more data use is the fact that Europe has actually been very successful in exporting its values around data. And so it's important for everyone to pay attention to what those values are, not only because perhaps they're right, as I alluded to before, in certain respects, but also because if you are trying to develop an interoperable system, which is really to the good, to allow for free flow of data between Korea and Korea's companies and Europe, you're going to need to pay attention to what the minimum bar will be to achieve some kind of adequacy determination. I think there are aspects of GDPR that will allow for robust use of data that are often ignored by the popular press or by people who haven't really paid attention to the details. Everyone thinks of GDPR as being a consent-based regime. Consent is one legal basis for processing data, but it is only one. The more innovative legal basis, and the one that I think Korea should pay attention to, is legitimate interest, which is a balancing test that needs to be engaged in internally within a company to decide whether the particular processing is more favorable towards the individual's rights and freedoms, or does it harm the individual's rights and freedoms with respect to the rights and freedoms of the company or others and things like that. It's a very sophisticated balancing test that needs to be undertaken, and I think that it does allow for a kind of AI system, especially when coupled with other provisions in GDPR. So pseudonymization is a type of de-identification that is allowed under GDPR, which does allow for companies to utilize data for secondary purposes. Again, as long as that legitimate interest test is met. I think GDPR goes too far in terms of its definition of de-identification, which would take you completely out of the framework and the requirements. Because under GDPR, de-identification is defined as there is no possibility of re-identifying that data. And I believe that that's a test that actually can't ever be met. If you talk to people in the intelligence community, they will tell you that if you have enough money, enough willpower, and enough time, you can always re-identify data. Now, in the face of technologies like differential privacy and federated learning and other, that may go away over time, but I think Korea has the opportunity to look at something like the standard that we created when we were at the FTC with respect to de-identification. Ed and I had the chance to work together for about a year or two at the FTC, and we wrote a report, along with our colleagues, of course, rethinking the privacy framework in the United States. And one of the elements of it that I think really is quite viable still today is the standard that we articulated for how de-identification should work. And that standard, which is in our 2012 report, you can find it online, the US Federal Trade Commission's 2012 report. That standard for de-identification is a three-part test. The first part is that the company will de-identify kind of to the best technological capability that it has. The second and third part are not technical requirements, but are social requirements. The first one being that the company promises never to re-identify that data on its own. And the third part of the test is that if the company provides that de-identified data to someone else, to a third party, that it has to require that that third party will not seek to re-identify the data. I actually think that's a stronger test and a realistic test. I should say it's a more realistic test than under GDPR, and it's a strong test. And I think that Korea has the opportunity to, again, sort of look at the best of both worlds and put it together and really create, I think, a robust legal framework that will allow for the use of data in AI systems, but will also protect privacy in a reasonable way. And again, you'll always need to be, I'm assuming you will want to be thinking about whether you've met, in this new system, the minimum bar for adequacy. And that's always going to be the red herring in the room that you'll have to be, it's actually not a red herring, it's actually a real issue that you'll have to be dealing with in the room. Maybe the elephant in the room is a better metaphor.
I would agree that I think the 2011 or 12 FTC standard for de-identification is a very good one. De-identification is a topic which is very technical, both in the computer science sense and in the regulatory sense. It's sometimes used to try to escape from some of the dilemmas of privacy and data processing. It's important to have a standard of de-identification that is rigorous enough to provide real protection for consumers, because ultimately the principle is that if data is transformed in a way that it's such that it does not pose realistic risk for consumers, then it can be used in a more permissive way. So it's important to have a high standard, and it's important to be realistic about what the technical community has found about the ability to re-identify. And that is that a very strong notion of de-identification from a technical standpoint is needed in order to prevent fairly simple re-identification of data. And this is where privacy-preserving technologies can also be very valuable. Differential privacy and federated learning, other such technologies allow an increasing amount of processing and use of data in ways that are provably protective of consumer privacy. And I think that's one of the things that we got right in that de-identification standard. It was written in a way that allowed new technologies to enter and be used. This is a very difficult issue and an important one that's often overlooked in writing these sorts of regulations, is exactly how is de-identification covered.
저는 기본적으로 이전 질문이 이제 트러스트였는데 지금 현재 질문은 그 빅데이터와 관련된 프라이버시 보호와 또 기업들이 상업적 활용에 대해서 균형점을 찾는 게 중요하다고 말씀해 했습니다. 사회자께서 지금 미세스 브릴이 FTC의 구체적인 경험과 그리고 FTC 마이크로소프트의 프라이빗의 경험을 이렇게 해서 구체적으로 말씀드렸는데요. 저는 좀 다른 스킴에서 한국의 아까 미세스 브릴이 한국 상황을 언급했잖아요. 점수도 A-를 줬고 미국하고 EU는 B+ 줬고 그걸 좀 구체적 상황을 가지고 좀 브로드하게 좀 레귤레이터로서 접근을 해보고자 합니다. 여러분도 아시다시피 세계 각국의 아주 유수한 연구기관들이 그 국가의 트러스트 인덱스가 올라가면 그 국가의 GDP 경제 성장도 올라간다고 그렇게 이제 많은 보고들이 나왔잖아요. 근데 특히 이 트러스트 빅데이터는 사실 개인정보와 관련되어 있기 때문에 상당히 민감하잖아요. 그래서 저는 빅데이터의 상업적 활용에 관해서는 신뢰가 정말 중요하다고 그렇게 생각합니다. 그 이유는 이제 개인들에게서 자기 정보 또는 자기네 접속 기록이 해서 가장 중요한 건 프라이버시, 내 정보가 제대로 활용될지, 내 정보가 어디로 흘러갈지, 또 내 민감한 정보가 활용되지 말아야 될 정보가 활용되고 있는지 이런 게 걱정인 반면에 사업자들은 레귤레이션이 없다 그러면 아마 모든 정보를 다 활용할 겁니다. 그러니까 사업자들 입장에서는 이 빅데이터에 대한 접근과 활용이 아마 사업의 성패를 좌우할 겁니다. 그래서 아마 이게 정말 중요한 이슈 같고요. 아까 모더레이터께서 말씀하신 것처럼 한국에서 지금 빅데이터의 상업적 활성화 관련해서 규제 완화 논의가 아주 첨예하게 대립되고 있습니다. 그 얘기는 제가 조금 전에 말씀드렸듯이 이 두 가치 내지 두 지향점이 너무나 상충되기 때문에 그런 것 같고요. 그래서 한국에서 빅데이터의 상업적 활성화에 반대하는 이유는 기본적으로 프라이버시 보호하고 데이터 시큐리티, 데이터 보안이 우선이라는 그 이유입니다. 근데 저는 기본적으로 이러한 갈등 내지 불신의 근본적 원인이 사업자들에게 있다는 사실은 부인하기는 좀 어려울 것 같아요. 제가 아까 그래서 먼저 조심스럽기 때문에 한국 상황을 말씀드린다고 말씀드렸습니다. 그동안 사업자들이 아까도 이전에도 나왔던 이용자들한테 불필요하거나 과다한 정보를 요구했던 건 사실인 것 같고요. 그 다음에 보유한 민간 개인 정보를 돈을 받고 대가를 받고 팔기도 했고, 그 다음에 계열회사나 자회사에게 제공해서 계열회사나 자회사의 사업에 활용하는 것도 있고요. 그 다음에 개인 정보를 통째로 해킹당한 사례도 있습니다. 저도 국제적으로 유명 인사입니다. 제 메일이 전 세계를 돌아다니고 제가 한동안 전 세계 수많은 사람들로부터 사업하자, 심지어 데이트하자, 수많은 메일들이 와서 제가 정말 저는 개인적으로 민감하게 반응하고 있습니다. 그래서 한마디로 개인정보 보호와 관련한 사업자들의 신뢰를 잃었기 때문에 사용자들이 정보 제공에 소극적이고 또 제공된 정보의 상업적 활용에 대해 제가 민감하게 반응하고 있는 것 같습니다. 그렇다고 제가 개인정보의 상업 활용을 반대하는 사람은 절대 아닙니다. 저는 기본적으로 빅데이터를 활용해갖고 새로운 상품을 만들고 새로운 제품을 개발하고 제가 원하는 정보를 주는 것은 기본적으로 좋다고 생각합니다. 그리고 가야 될 방향이고요. 따라서 빅데이터의 상업적 활성화 위해서 우선 신뢰 회복이 중요합니다. 아까 트러스트 말씀하셨지만 신뢰만 회복된다 그러면 이런 신뢰 바탕 위에서 개인정보 보호하고 빅데이터의 상업적 활용에 대한 균형을 찾는 지혜가 필요할 것 같고요. 그래서 제가 아까 한국도 언급됐지만 여기 계신 분들 네 분 다 한국 분들이니까 우리 미래 먹거리 아니겠습니까? 그래서 지금 한국의 상황이 지금 어디에 와 있는지 그리고 그 상황을 베이스로 해서 어디로 가야 되는지 한번 생각해 보시기 바랍니다.
Thank you, Director General Kim. I did have a few other questions, but with the remaining 15 minutes left, I thought it'd be the time to open questions to the floor. We'll receive a few questions and then maybe give our panelists an opportunity to close.
I listened to you with very interesting set up. Well, I agree a lot with Director General Kim said about privacy. But on the other hand, if you really want to develop artificial intelligence, you really need lots and lots of data. And I know that Mr. Song will probably agree that Korea has such high level of privacy protection that it's very difficult to develop the type of databases you need to implement artificial intelligence programs or develop artificial intelligence. And so, like all the panelists said, there's got to be some balance between the need of industry to use information and consumers to protect their privacy. On the other hand, if you look at any individual, that individual has some tolerance for the level of information that they're willing to share. And to create a program or balance that says this will fit everyone is, I think, nonsense. I think just like in the marketplace, there are people who are willing to sell their information at a very low price, and there are people who are willing to sell it at a very high price or never sell it. And so the question is, how do you come up with a privacy policy that would be tailored toward the different preferences of individuals and allow that information to be used in a very productive manner. So anyways, that's, what would be the best option for creating a system like that?
Part of the answer, I think, is to work toward developing information architectures and ways of organizing activity that are more flexible and allow a better integration of privacy protection with the use of machine learning. And this means moving away from always using a model of collecting all of the information and then transferring all of the information. Instead, approaches in which information is held more closely and in which there is a more distributed or federated process of doing analysis and creating value out of that data. That can allow you to do more machine learning by using privacy-preserving learning algorithms and other sorts of more advanced technical methods while preserving privacy or while collecting less data and transferring less data. So there are ways to use technology to reduce what would otherwise be a very difficult trade-off between privacy and usability. The trade-off cannot be eliminated, but it can be reduced by using new technical architectures. And of course, it's then important for regulatory structures to take that into account and being flexible enough to be able to give credit and a more latitude, more freedom to use structures that are more privacy protective, in order so that the architectures that do better balance those values are able to come into use.
저는 지금 리처드가 질문한 내용 중에 다른 소비자들, 그러니까 개인정보 제공자들이 어떤 사람은 돈을 주고 돈을 받으면 이렇게 정보 제공할 수 있고 어떤 사람은 아니고 해서 다 차별화됐는데 저는 기본적으로 정보를 돈을 주고 파는 메커니즘 시장이 있다면 뭐 전적으로 맞을 것 같아요. 근데 지금까지 나타난 현상은 이렇잖아요. 그러니까 이용자들이 특정 플랫폼을 이용하려면 정보를 주고 그리고 플랫폼을 이용하는데 사실 그 사업자들은 그 정보가 돈이 아니겠습니까? 사실 개인들한테 프로 서비스를 하는데 그 이용자들이 그 메커니즘 내 개인 정보가 돈일 수도 있고 사업자들이 그걸 위해서 돈을 번다는 이렇게 자기 정보 주체라는 인식이 좀 부족한 것 같아요. 그래서 아마 사회적으로 만약 노력을 한다면 우리 그 소비자들한테 이 정보는 당신의 자산이고 이 자산이 기업들에게 흘러가면 어떻게 이용돼야 된다는 걸 알아야 된다. 그래서 정말 원하는 정보를 다 달라고 하면 주고 반대급부를 받아야 된다. 이런 그 좀 소비자 교육 내지 이런 메커니즘이 필요할 것 같고요. 그 중에 하나가 최근에 이제 소비자 보호, 뭐 EU도 마찬가지고 한국도 마찬가지고 사업자들이 그 정보 제공을 요구할 때 좀 더 구체적으로 어떤 정보 제공하면 어떻게 사용되어진다는 걸 알려주고, 특히 제가 개인적으로 좀 한국에서는 너무나 우리가 구글 예를 들면 제가 접속할 때 하고 한국의 플랫폼을 접속할 때 하고 차이점이 막 한국에는 너무나 많은 좀 민감한 아까 그 아이덴티파이가 될 수 있는 그런 정보들 요구하는 경향이 있는 것 같아요. 그래서 아마 한국의 그 이용자들이 규제 완화, 그 빅데이터 활성화에 대해서 좀 더 그 과민한 반응을 나타내는 것 같고요. 그런 차원에서 이제 한국적인 특성에서 이런 문제들이 해결되면 아마도 지금보다 그 이용자들이 좀 관대하게 정보 데이터 활용에 대해서 좀 더 관대하게 접근할 수 있겠다는 생각이 듭니다.
So I think that the policymakers have the assumption that all the companies are evil, and so basically two things that there's no evil in making money. So because we have to make money to provide all these jobs to all these people's developers. And the second of all, the Naver search, basically search the model is that we don't make any money. All the service doesn't make any money. It's just that the search adds the revenue to the company. So most of the service that the Naver or Google, or for example, does not actually think about making money from every click. They actually, like 24 hours a day, we think about how we increase the consumer value, user value. So I think the assumption here is very different from the policymaker and the actual service provider.
Just to follow up on the awareness type comments. So awareness of use is one thing, but I think we also need to think about awareness in terms of the impacts, communicating awareness around risks, who are the actual benefits for. I think that's very different from saying we'll use data for a particular thing or a technical process versus actually trying to communicate or convey what the risk is to a particular individual.
I'm going to spend the last few minutes giving you an opportunity to wrap up. If I maybe just add one comment as a moderator about just what was just said, my impression has been that often if consumers or users, end users, truly knew what was happening, much of their concern might even be alleviated. In many cases, if they knew what was available and how to protect their data or take positive steps to that, and perhaps they would be more willing to do so and undertake the cost. And so I think it's very important. I think even today, a lot of, many of what was talked about stressed not only visibility, but also the need to educate consumers. And I think that's going to be an ongoing theme going ahead. So I'm going to give maybe just a minute to each of our panelists just to wrap up and any final comments they have.
오늘 질문이 4개 나오는데 그 질문 4개를 관통하는 질문은 결국은 데이터를 기반하라는 디지털 경제가 잘 돼야 된다는 거. 또 그 이면에는 프라이버시도 보호해야 되는데 결국은 그 적점이 이 규제를 어떻게 스킴을 어떻게 갖고 갈 것인지 그 문제일 것 같은데요. 제가 좀 큰 스킴으로 그 신산업하고 전통산업에서 특징이 뭐고 그래서 규제가 어떻게 바뀌어야 되는지 간단하게 좀 말씀드리겠습니다. 사실 그 디지털 경제는 그 산업 간의 장벽을 허무는 융복합이 특징이잖아요. 그리고 상당한 스피드와 그리고 다양한 소비자의 기호를 맞추는 게 다양성인데 전통 산업은 아시다시피 그 칸을 딱 쳐놓고 칸 안에서 이제 활동하는 걸 규제하는 건데 그래서 전통 산업에서 있는 전통 산업에 적용되는 규제를 아마 신산업에 그대로 적용하면 제가 볼 때는 신산업의 그 성장 발전에 걸림돌을 주는 건 맞습니다. 분명히 맞는데 제가 예를 들어서 한국에서 그 숙박 공유하고 차량 공유 사업이 처음에 이제 생기자 전통적인 그 숙박하고 차량 공유 택시 업체들이 우리는 이만큼 규제를 받는데 왜 저쪽은 규제를 안 받느냐. 그래서 규제 형평차에서 우리가 받고 있는 규제를 저쪽에서 다 받자. 이렇게 해서 지금 한국에 이제 16후보가 이제 좌절된 사례가 있습니다. 근데 저는 그거는 대안이 아니라고 생각합니다. 기본적으로 신산업의 특징이 전통산업의 특징하고 다른데 그걸 똑같은 규제를 같이 적용하자 이런 바람직한 대안이 아니라고 보고요. 따라서 규제 아마 신산업에도 오늘 우리가 규제가 없어야 된다는 건 아니잖아요. 그러니까 기본적인 방향은 규제 형평성의 방향을 잡되 이 전통산업도 시대가 바뀜에 따라서 경제 환경, 사회 환경이 바뀌니까 전통산업에 낡고 쓸모없는 규제는 과감히 없애거나 또는 뭐 필요하더라도 완화하거나 하면서 신산업은 뭐 건강이라든가 아까 프라이버시 보호라든가 안전이라든가 이런 최소한의 규제만 해서 이렇게 두 규제 간의 규제 차별 이슈를 완화해가는 게 아마 합리적인 대안이 아닌가 그렇게 생각하고 있습니다.
Some conclusion. So we basically our competition is basically China and America and European countries where there's no boundary for competition. So we do see all these, especially for China. We have a branch in Shenzhen for hardware and software, and whenever I get there, it's a very different world, and I don't see we are going fast enough. They're much faster for than us, and playing level field. So basically, we get to work, we get to play, we get to fight with all these competitions in the same level field, and so we also we are basically trying hard to actually communicate with all these people, with all the users, with the enough the options to opt in and opt out for the privacy and security purposes.
I've heard it said that where we're at with data protection now is like health and safety in the 1970s. In the sense there's a lot of confusion about what to do, what is needed, pushback from various sides and things. So a lot of things will need to work out. So it's important to have a social discussion around these sorts of issues. We need to improve levels of understanding right across the board throughout the stakeholders. And as Julie mentioned, absolutely right, useful information to be able to make these discussions go forward. There is a role for technology that can assist some of these concerns, but it's certainly not the answer in and of itself.
This was a great discussion, and it's so hard to think of how to summarize thoughts in a couple of minutes, but I will try. We are clearly in a moment where there has been a paradigm shift about the way we think about the relationship between companies, governments, regulators, users, in the context of privacy and in the context of prosperity. The reason we are experiencing this paradigm shift is because of the Snowden revelations several years ago, which dealt with government access to information and data held by companies often. The Cambridge Analytica revelations, which the Director General alluded to in terms of really learning about some of the potentially more troubling aspects of the way in which data was being transferred without consumers' knowledge or understanding. And also data breaches, which are happening with great regularity here in Korea, happen with great regularity in the United States, and seems to be a problem that regulators, at least in the United States, have a lot of trouble figuring out. So what are the results of this information that has come out in society? We have GDPR. We have a very strong European regulation, which again, I think is good in some ways and has some problems in other ways. And we also have Europe thinking about an even stronger regulation, the e-privacy regulation, which is something that is right on the horizon. And if you aren't paying attention to that, I strongly recommend you do. We have a draft bill, a proposal really in India that would even go much further with respect to how data needs to be regulated, creating data fiduciaries out of companies. And I think, and also very focused on data localization, a lot of provisions in that proposal, which I think we need to think very deeply about, because India is a huge economic a huge place for economic partnership, has a huge population, and I think the future of the country could ride in many ways on where this bill goes. And in the United States, we have a new law in California, which we haven't talked about yet, but has been inspired by some aspects of GDPR, and also has a private right of action, which a number of companies are deeply concerned about. So where does this leave Korea? Where does this leave any group of policymakers who want to set a smart path going forward? And as I said, I think that the United States is far from perfect. We are actually very much encouraging baseline privacy legislation in the United States. We think that it's time. We think that it should mirror many of the GDPR rights and responsibilities, but again, be a little bit smarter in the ways that I am encouraging Korea to think about. But what should anyone who is now thinking about the future path for data and companies and privacy protection? I think there's several principles, 3 principles. One is to ensure that you do have interoperability, so that companies like Mr. Song's don't only have the ability to operate here in Korea, but can go abroad if they wish to, and can do so relatively easily, because that is where prosperity has often been found. A second is to ensure data flows in an appropriate way that enhances human-centered AI in all the ways I talked about in my opening speech. And then the third thing that obviously needs to be thought through is how to protect privacy, how to protect security, how to be fair, how to be inclusive, those 4 principles that we think about in this very complex world. This is not going to be easy, as I said, but I think that, that we have to recognize that there has been a shift, and that the old solutions that were created in the United States, here in Korea, frankly, even GDPR, which is now 7 years old, it was originally drafted 7 years ago, I think all of these things do need to be rethought in terms of whether they are right-fitted for the future. And that's my deep concern, is that we think about the future.
It's very important to be thoughtful as we develop AI, but it's important as well to remember the tremendous benefits that AI can bring if we move ahead quickly with its development and with its use. There are tremendous benefits available in science, in health, in the environment, in education, and in so many of the things that are important to us. AI also offers the potential for significant growth in the productivity of our workforces, something which, with good economic policies, provides better outcomes in the economy for everyone and more resources which our societies can use to address our many challenges. So there is a lot at stake and there is a lot to gain by moving ahead quickly. But of course, if you want to drive quickly, it's important to be good at steering. And so we have to understand how to develop this technology in a way that makes it trustworthy, predictable, and aligned with our values. Only by doing that will we be able to advance it as quickly as we can. It's important that we understand how to integrate technology with governance intellectually, just as we have an integrated conversation between different stakeholders, including policymakers, companies, and citizens. And then finally, I think this is an issue that is inherently international. It is going to require cooperation among people all around the world, and no one country or society or community has figured out what the best solution is. And so international dialogue will be important. And then finally, I would simply like to commend our translators for an incredible display of human intelligence.
With that, I would like to wrap up this session. I do hope, the organizers hope that you enjoy your lunch, and please be back for the next sessions, which will be as exciting and stimulating. Please join me and thank our stellar panel for an interesting and stimulating discussion.